Lovely to see you, Sue. How are you?
And you? I'm well, thank you, Luca. And you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. So my name's Luca, as you know. I'm the co-owner and co-founder of the Living Care Company, and I think we first spoke in 2022. Sue, you'd come to us needing living care for Dad, and just tell us a bit about your overall situation with Dad, and where he was living, and what his sort of care needs were, and what your hopes were for the situation for him and the family.
At that point, he was diagnosed with vascular dementia. He was mobile. He had days where he was quite bright and cheerful, but at night time he could be a bit of a pickle. He would be trying to get out of bed. So at that point, I had domiciliary carers going in and somebody overnight. And I just thought, well, might as well go the whole hog and have a day carer and a night carer. So that's
Was
where I was in 22.
in 22, and is
Mm.
living care's a bit less expensive, isn't it, than having day carers plus a separate night care? Is that what you found, or
Yes, and that way I would have had the same person throughout the week. I didn't know who was always coming with domiciliary care. And I wanted him to have, because of his dementia, I wanted him to be familiar with the people who were coming to him. And my hope was that he sort of, with the three of them in the house, there'd be a sort of family situation. So they would sit down and eat their meals together and that sort of thing. So it was more of a companionship to begin with. But obviously, as he got progressively worse, he needed a great amount of care.
so you went from having domiciliary carers visiting during the day. You didn't really have control over who that was.
No,
Sometimes you knew who the person was coming in, sometimes
yeah,
maybe you didn't. Then you
and
had a night carer as well,
yeah,
who
and they
was
were all variable. Some of them were very, very good, and some of them weren't.
the night carers. How many consecutive nights might the same carer do?
If I was lucky, too.
Really? Yeah.
Mm.
And that sort of domiciliary care agency providing the night care as well as the.
Yes, yeah.
And then at a certain point, you thought, okay, let's just get a living carer in, or was it two that you got in at
No, I
that
always
point?
went for two because I knew that because he was trying to get out of bed at night and he could be a bit of a pickle, and I didn't want someone being exhausted looking after Dad. It was his house. He was living on his own. That's why I had two people with him.
Yeah.
I came to see him every day, but I wasn't living there.
And then sort of fast forward to, I think, November 2022, which was when you first started using our
Yeah.
service. What was it that sort of prompted you
Prompted
to?
me? Well, the company who were providing the live-in carers asked me to update Dad's medical records. I did. At that point, he was on oxygen occasionally. And they said that was a prescribed drug and there was no way that their carers could have responsibility for that. And they were withdrawing their care. They phoned me at 6 o'clock at night and were going to remove the carers then. So I said, can you imagine the conversation I had with them? But I did say, no, that's not fair on my father. You can't just withdraw care immediately. And it's not fair on your carers either, because I knew that one of the carers had rented out their property to somebody else whilst they were staying at my father's house. And I said, you're rendering your carer homeless. So they very kindly gave me till the next morning, which by that time I'd already been in contact with yourself because I thought I'm going to phone every care company I can. And you were top of my list because I looked you guys up previously. And by 4 o'clock the next day, we'd interviewed two carers and you had them in place. And it was wonderful ever after that because your carers were professional, they were friendly, they were supportive to myself, telling me what I can do to improve things for my father. And they were just wonderful with Dad. And I couldn't have asked for better help. And also, your company very kindly took on the carer who was going to be made homeless because he'd been with Dad for a very long time. And I was hoping that the care could continue with that particular carer. And you very kindly accommodated that and took him on board. And he was thrilled, and he's always been a lovely, lovely chap. So, I mean, he was, if anyone's lucky enough to have him, may I say his name?
Yes.
Yeah, Nkrumah. If you're ever lucky enough to have Nkrumah, he's the most brilliant cook. He organised all the food for Dad. Prior to that, I was sort of prompting ladies to do something, or I would go in and do a batch cook for him. But Nkrumah would do absolutely everything for me, put it in the freezer with labels when it was to be eaten, when it wasn't. And also, I think it's nice for a man to have a man sometimes, not just ladies. But the ladies were lovely. And you provided me with, I think, I had 2 permanent ladies, and then I had 2 ladies who were relief carers, and they were all wonderful.
In particular, what do you think, providing care is a two-way street, like
Yeah,
carers feel well, they they'll do a much better job and they'll feel
yeah,
over. Why do you think it was such a success with 6 one, half dozen of the other? Uh,
yeah. I think probably because, well, A, I was there the whole time, every day, because I wanted to, they have a 2-hour break, and I was covering the 2-hour break. So I could make sure that Dad's care could be extended for as long as possible. But it was like being part of the family. We treated them as part of the family, which is what we wanted. And, I mean, I'm going to say a name. I hope you don't mind. When Trudy was going on holiday to Canada to a wedding, and she was showing me all the photos of the dresses she was going to buy. And I was, we're discussing where to go to get pashminas and things like that. And then, she sent me the photos when she was at the wedding, and we're still in touch. I'm still in touch with Nkrumah and Trudy, who are lovely. And when I had Belina, because my father came from Austria, he would sometimes lapse into his version of German. She had a son in Germany, and she would phone him up and ask him what these words meant, or listen to what he was saying. So they went over and above what they needed to do to look after my dad. And you couldn't have asked for more.
Amazing. What would would you give anyone any particular advice? Obviously, having 2 carers in place doing living care, covering their client over a 24-hour period is a little bit unusual, but it does obviously happen when someone with care needs are sort of around the clock. What did you notice about the 2 carers being able to get on to cooperate together, and how did you sort of help that process take place?
Well, I didn't really have to do with the carers from your company. I didn't have to do any of that. They just got on. They would do 1 week on nights, 1 week on days. And they were very good at saying, well, this needs to be doing. And when it came to certain times when Dad needed to be changed, or if he had to be hoisted, they would arrange. So at a certain time in the day, both of them would deal with the care. I didn't have to do any of that. Whereas with another company, I was being told by a young madam when I could come into my father's house. And in the end, I sat down and I drew up a protocol of when things were to be done, because I was just so fed up with it. But I didn't have
So,
any of that bother. I didn't have to manage anything.
yeah, it's actually called you up and said, "Oh, to go to Dad's house at this time or this time."
Well, I went in, and they swapped over at 9 o'clock. So he wasn't being got up and dressed or anything until 10 or half past. I went in one time and she said, no, you're not coming in now. And I said, I am, young lady. I'm coming in when I like. This is my home, not yours. She thought she was better than she was. She thought she was a physiotherapist. She was making Dad do little exercises and things, which were totally ridiculous, that he didn't need to be doing, because at that stage he was immobile. And yes, it would be nice for him to move around, but it got to the stage when she raised her voice to me, and to my shame and my chagrin, I raised my voice back. And after that, I said, right, we're going to have a meeting. I sat down, and Nkrumah was there with this woman. We went through it all, and he did say to me, I'm glad you've done this, because quite frankly, I was going to leave. I couldn't put up with her any longer. But this wasn't your company. And when I phoned the company to to make my complaints, they said, well, that's up for you. That's down to you to deal with, which I thought was totally inadequate. They should be supporting me because I was paying this girl. I mean, I walked in the kitchen one time into the house and she was in the kitchen doing yoga. Now, I specifically asked that my father be looked after constantly. So whenever I went in, he could be fast asleep and Trudy would be there. And okay, she could be watching TV or she could be on the phone to her family, but she was sat there with my dad. And as soon as he woke up, she was with him, and Krumer would get out his LPs and he'd point to the one he wanted and then he'd look it up and Krumer would look it up on his phone and play it through his speaker for dad. The They were just fabulous.
That's
Absolutely. And I went through dad's old photographs and I arranged them all into the houses that he'd lived in throughout his life. And I showed the carers where they were, and I'd often go in and find them going through the photos with dad. Because that was, a nice thing to trigger memories for him. So I can't say enough about how wonderful your carers were. And to me as well, Trudy was there when dad was dying and she said to me, go and hold his hand now, because I think this is it. I was being ever the optimist, hoping it wasn't. But, she was great. And we shed a tear together. And she was really good. So I
um,
can't recommend them enough, Luca. I really can't. And I have to say that for me, if I'm ever in that situation, I would want to be kept in my own home. Dad had requested that on his respect form that he stayed in his own home. And I would want that because my feeling was if I had him in a care home, they'd go in, they might give him his breakfast, they might wash him, and then they'd leave him. And he'd be left to his, sometimes he'd be wandering in his mind and his hands would be everywhere or be trying to get out of bed. But he always had someone with him to make sure that didn't happen. And that's very important.
so the choice to have living care was always one that he strongly sort of felt he didn't want to go to a care home,
Yeah.
and you supported him in that.
Yeah, I think it's the best choice. I really do. I have a friend whose father has dementia and he's in a home. And she was fighting them because they wanted to medicate him the whole time. Because, they can sometimes, fortunately, my dad wasn't, but they can be difficult. And, she desperately doesn't want that to happen to her father. And I'm fortunate that I lived close enough to my dad that I could make sure that everything was just as he wanted.
Thanks, Sue. That was lovely. So, can you tell me a bit about obviously spoken about the carers that have been brilliant, but what about the support that you got from our office? How did that work
Oh,
out?
they're marvellous. Really lovely. Nicola and Caroline, always very friendly, very helpful. I mean, one time, I said to my husband, he always did the shopping for dad. And I said, look, take dad's card. It's easier that way. And bless him, he lost it. And of course, that was the card that I had to stop that card and the payments were coming from that card. And I phoned the company and Caroline, or I think it was Nicola I spoke to on that particular occasion, don't worry, it's not a problem. I'm sure it'll be fine. And it was because they carried on taking it out. That was fine. It was just that people couldn't make payments on it. But, always helpful, always phoning up to see how things were going, which was lovely. I didn't need to be called every week because I had people who were there for, they would be in place for 3 or 4 months at a time. So everything just went smoothly.
So Trudy and Belina and Kuruma, they were sort of doing about sort of 8 or 10 week stints, were they?
Well, Belina was only there when one of them went away, but she was good because Trudy went away and then Nkrumah went away and Nkrumah had a problem and he couldn't get back. And Belina was happy to stay. So, yeah, so I had people for, really good long times. I mean, sometimes it was longer than 3 months at a time. They were happy to stay, which was lovely.
We certainly wouldn't ever stop a carer staying as long as they're happy and as long as you're happy, really.
Yeah.
There's point as long
No,
as they're not over.
and we would say, well, my husband would come on a Thursday usually, and we'd say, well, he said, I'm going into Slough. Do you want a lift? So whichever one was working would usually go into Slough and do shopping with David and then come back again so that, we could take them so they didn't have to get Ubers into Slough and back again or whatever. So, we tried to make it as easy for them as possible. And well, you would take your family to the shops, wouldn't you? So we viewed them as family. So that was for us.
Absolutely. You had carers from us, Sue. Were there sort of many challenges to overcome with, I don't know, scheduling or maybe any other sort of challenges that you needed to deal with? All pretty smooth.
It was all very smooth. They were very good. If I was away, they could phone the ambulance. And they did. I mean, a couple of times we'd gone down to Rye, and they had the ambulance out 2 nights on the trot. And I said to the ambulance chap, shall I come home? And he said yes. So that was fine. But they were quite competent to do that when we went down for our last holiday. We were only in Cornwall for less than 24 hours before they had to call us to come back. And, they would take the responsibility on. They would phone the pharmacy for ordering his medicines and his creams and things. So that took all of that off me, which was lovely. They were quite happy to phone when Dad was on palliative care. They were quite happy to phone the hospice if they had a query about anything. So, it was great in that respect because although I tried to lead the whole situation, I didn't have to have the responsibility all the time. They shared it with me, which was lovely.
What advice would you give to family who are considering their care options, whether to maybe have residential care or living care? And then often, families might have some family members who tilt towards residential, others that tilt
Yeah.
towards living care. How would you sort of suggest they sort of go through that process of decision making? What would you recommend to them?
Well, if their loved one is able to express their wish, then you go with what they want. A friend of mine is having problems with her mother, and she was talking about care, and I explained the situation with my dad and actually gave her your number. But I just said that if you want your loved one to be looked after and cared for and treated with dignity, then I really think living care is the best thing. Because your carers are all, Belina was doing refresher courses online, and they don't sort of stagnate. They develop themselves, which is great. So they're aware of what needs to be done.
Now, obviously, you've had a lot of experience of care, domiciliary carers, night carers coming in, of all sorts of living carers coming in. What are the things in the care that you value the highest and that you notice most difference to the outcome and to how well things go? What qualities does the carer need to have possess?
They need to have love. They need to actually really care for the person they're looking after. And I feel that your guys certainly did that. They need to obviously put their charge first, which is important. It's not, oh, hang on a minute, I'm on the phone, which I would have had from this other young lady from another company. To just keep routine, particularly if they've got dementia. I think it's very important to have the routine. Your ladies and gentlemen were wonderful. They
They've
knew
got
what
someone,
to do.
haven't they? They've got someone
Yeah,
to be there.
they did. And, Trudy said to me, oh, it's so much better. I had a slider sheet that NRS had given us. And she said, if you don't mind, these are better sheets. So I ordered a couple of sets of sheets. And they taught me, well, Dad was quite poorly one time and I stayed with him. I didn't go home. I sat up with him all night with Nkrumah. But they showed me how to use all the equipment so I could use it all with them. So, if when I was on my own, not that I was ever on my own because there was always somebody in the house. And if there was a problem, I could call them. But, if I had to move, Dad was a bit of a wriggler and I could move him up the bed on my own because they showed me how to do it and all of that. So they were very informative in that respect. And, let's get some spray for his mouth if he was feeling poorly, which I would never have thought of. So that, they were giving me such wonderful tips the whole time as to how to care for him, which I wanted to do because I wanted to look after him. So it was very helpful.
Anything else you'd like to add? And thanks so much for giving of your time. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well,
Any other tips that you would give to someone thinking about living care or?
go and look at homes and see what your gut feeling is. If you're not sure, go and look at them and just wander off when, see what's happening when you're not, so you can see what's going on. Because my recollection of when my grandmother was in a care home was that they brought her downstairs and sat her in a chair. Okay, they may have played bingo or something, but, she didn't really benefit from that. In fact, she made us take her home again anyway. So, we had to care for her at home. So my experience is that home is best. Don't worry about equipment because you can ask your if you haven't got a physiotherapist involved or you haven't got somebody, ask your GP, and NRS provide you with absolutely everything you need. When Dad was originally, we had a hospital bed that they gave us. Then they gave us a bed that went down to the floor with a crash mat. So when he was really restless at night, there was no worry of him falling out of bed, which had happened with the other company. They gave us a reclining chair. So when he was mobile, he would have his reclining chair. They gave him his walkers, absolutely everything like that, a perching stool so he could go to the kitchen and sit there and we could wash him in the kitchen. They provided all the equipment. So you don't have to worry about going out buying equipment. The state provide it for you. All you have to do is provide the care. And if someone wants to stay in their home, that's the very best thing, in my opinion.
It's March now, and Dad sadly passed away in November. So obviously, I've been through that. Both of my parents, and your life massively changes, doesn't it? After
Yes.
your parent has been a large part, very large part of the focus of everything that you're doing. How's it been since Dad passed away? With the memory of what happens, very important as well, isn't it? Right?
Yes, it is. Well, we had an interesting situation because Dad, being Dad, wanted to give his body to medical science. So I had a terrible trouble to get the doctor's surgery to issue the death notification so I could go to the registrar, but that's just by the by. So we had organised a wake at Dad's house, which was lovely. And then it's just going into the house. Every time I go in the house, I say hello to Dad. I've just come in to do this, Dad, or I'm just sorting out that. But we went away for our first holiday in 18 months last week, which was wonderful. I've got to renew my passport because I didn't renew my passport. It rang out during COVID and I thought there's no point. So it's all that sort of thing. And it's developing a life again. Or one thing I will say, I've just looked across and my little dog's fast asleep, but all your carers accepted my dog. They were quite happy for me to bring my dog into the house every day, and Grimmer would buy her treats and things and Trudy would play with her. And Belina was a little bit scared, but she got used to her. They were all very accommodating of what was necessary for me and for Dad, because he loved to see Molly as well.
Sweet. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
dogs do have a massive beneficial therapeutic
They
impact.
do.
Right.
They do.
Bring down the stress levels and whatnot. But,
Yeah.
so it's been absolutely lovely to speak to you. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Lovely to see you, Luca. And I've always been very grateful for you guys getting me out of that horrible hole.
Absolute pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.